Good morning, everyone, and welcome to part 2 of the Ready to Try 2024 pre-race webinar for the 2024 Houston Texans Kids Triathlon. I'm joined today by Coach Meagan, who's going to be going over some details about triathlon in general and how to have a successful race. She's going to be covering a few different topics today, so I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Meagan so you guys can listen up.
All right, thank you. So race success for us just means that your athlete has a fun time and they either want to do this race or sign up for a triathlon again. And so that for us is success. So one of the best ways to make sure that they have a successful race is being prepared and kind of understanding what's going on, eliminating all of the what ifs and controlling the controllables. So one of the things that I always say is we need to make sure that you have your kind of gear figured out way ahead of time. That gives you a little bit of wiggle room if you need to switch things or you need to adjust anything. And it also lets your athlete get really comfortable with their gear before race day. So there's a couple of things that you have to have. There's a couple of things that are helpful to have. And then there are things that the race director is going to give you in your packet. So we're going to go through all of that today. So as far as they have to have something to race in. So for most athletes, it's a swimsuit. It could be a tri-suit. So if your athlete already has a swimsuit that they like, that they're comfortable in, one that they maybe race swim team in, summer swim, that's perfect. A lot of boys like to wear a jammer. You can also wear board shorts, a racing brief, any of that is fine. If you would like to, you can get a tri-suit, which is essentially kind of like a swimsuit, but it's, for the most part, they're going to be longer and they'll have a little bit of a chamois or a little bit of a cushion in them for whenever you're cycling. The athlete that's on the screen right now, that's actually a swimsuit style tri-suit. So there's lots of different options. You don't have to buy something special for this, but if you'd like to, you can find them on different websites. So the swimsuit or tri-suit is the first part. The next thing you have to have is a bike. So it can be most any kind of bike. It needs to have 2 wheels. It needs to have working brakes. It needs to be able to hold air in its tires. And it just needs to be safe for your athlete to ride. So as they come in on race day, there'll be a bike check. You don't want to find out at bike check that your brakes don't work or that your tires aren't holding air. So those kinds of things, check ahead of time. We have athletes that will race on mountain bikes, road bikes. We call neighborhood bikes kind of the ones that kids play in the neighborhoods on. Any of those are absolutely fine. You do also want to make sure that their chain is in good working order. A lot of times we realize Texas weather is really, really difficult on bikes. Chains get rusty, start to slip off of gears, different things like that. So check all of those things. Bike shops start to get busy. So we want to make sure all of that is good ahead of time. And if you need to get it into the bike shop, you can. The next thing that you have to have is a helmet. So I do know that a lot of times I see kids riding without their helmet. So if your kid hasn't worn their helmet in a long time, 1, you need to make sure that it still fits. And 2, double check and make sure there's no cracks in it. They have a tendency to toss them on the ground. Sometimes that will cause cracks. If they're really old, they sometimes also start to create a little bit of a crack in them. So make sure that your athlete's helmet fits. It needs to go on top of their head. You want to make sure that there's no more than 2 finger widths between the eyebrow and the bottom of the helmet. It should not shake around when they move their head. And then when it clasps underneath, you want to make sure that you can get it snug enough so about 2 fingers fit under here, but that it doesn't slip off over the chin. Most of them will have a V right here that comes down underneath the ear. So get all of those things adjusted for the athlete before race day, and you want to make sure that they're comfortable getting the helmet on and clasping it. Also, take hair into consideration. Most of the time, especially for our girls, hair in a low ponytail or braid or something of that is helpful. A high ponytail is going to cause lots of frustration in transition. So whenever you try their helmet on, try different hairstyles. If they have a lot of hair, just to make sure that that's going to work on race day. The next thing that they have to have is shoes. So they don't need to have necessarily fancy, expensive running shoes, but they do need to have some type of athletic shoe that they can run in. So I do highly recommend something that's easy to get on because for the most part, we want them doing as much in transition by themselves as they can. So some type of athletic shoe, preferably a low top, preferably not super, super hard soled because those are hard to run in. These right here, elastic laces make it a whole lot easier on race day to get in and out of the shoe as opposed to having tie laces. If they have Velcro, even easier. Now, some of the things that are optional, goggles. Goggles are actually optional. You do not have to have them to race in, but most kids are going to want them. Whatever they're comfortable in. Again, it does not need to be fancy. It's just whatever they're good with, whatever you already have, totally fine. I also recommend a towel, not to have a whole body dry down, but so that they can at least wipe their feet. And if they have any gravel or dirt on the bottom of them, if there's something they really need to wipe, get water out of their eyes, they've got that in transition. I also like a really bright one. It makes it a little bit easier for the kids to find their spot if they know what color they're looking for. I also like to roll it up like this because it makes it easier to put in the bag. And then they can just unroll it into a mat in transition whenever they go to set up. Another optional thing is socks. They do not have to race in socks. So these are completely optional. If you know for a fact that they need to wear socks, they tend to get blisters, sensitive to different sensations, then I highly recommend socks, but again, optional. Sunglasses, sensitive to the sun or just like to wear them. Those are optional. If they need to wear glasses for biking and running, like to actually be able to see, make sure to include those. Excuse me. And then a race belt. So a race belt is optional. It does make it a little bit easier for a lot of the athletes because when we get to bib numbers, that goes on there. That's how their numbers are shown whenever they're running. I do like to keep it clasped and just have them step into it like a pair of pants. Makes it a little bit easier than trying to do another clasp. If they are not going to use a race belt, then you can put their number directly on their swimsuit or their tri-suit by using safety pins, or their t-shirt. If they're going to add a t-shirt or a pair of shorts in transition, you can safety pin it to that. So that takes the place of a race belt, excuse me. Water, you want to make sure they're staying hydrated. It's a long morning for a lot of the athletes, especially our long course athletes. So make sure they have something to sip on. Snacks. A lot of times the kids won't eat super early in the morning, but that way they have something to eat ahead of their race. And sunscreen. It will be dark when you get there. You're not going to think about sunscreen most likely. Make sure you get that on them before they race because it's a long morning. And by the time they get done, it will be bright and sunny, hopefully. Then some of the things that are going to be provided for you. So those things are going to be numbers that are going to go on everything. You are going to get a timing chip. It'll look different than this, I'm certain, and a swim cap. So those are all going to be things that you're going to want to get ready. If when you're going through, you realize that you're missing something or you've done a trial run with a piece of equipment and you need to replace it beforehand, that gives the athlete time to get used to it before race day. So whenever you start getting ready to pack, I recommend doing this the night before. Most likely you will have already picked up your packet, so you have your race numbers, all of that stuff, as well as the stuff that you've gotten together for the race. Lay everything out the night before, make a packing list so that you can make sure that you have everything. Lay it out on the ground, have a bag, a duffel bag, backpack, something that everything will fit in. And it makes it a whole lot easier than carrying little bits and pieces everywhere. I highly, highly recommend doing race tattoos the night before. Sometimes the race tattoos and sunscreen don't work well together. So if you have the race tattoos already on your body, then that's going to be super helpful. You're going to have one for each side. There's a really, really good diagram that comes with all the race information. So that will be helpful. Make sure to read the instructions because parents a lot of times will put the numbers on upside down, forget to take the little plastic piece off before they go to adhere them. So make sure you read the directions, put those on the night before, and then also you're going to put your helmet sticker on your helmet the night before. So you just want to find a spot. These help you make sure that you're getting your athlete's picture. So if you want to have good pictures of your athlete, make sure that your race numbers are all really visible. So helmet number, you're going to put it on the helmet. There's going to be a number that goes on the bike. All of those numbers are going to match. So you want to make sure everything's installed the night before. And then you're also going to want to make sure you pack your race number. And then all of the equipment that we just went through. So double check it, go down your list, get your athlete involved so that they have a say, because they might notice that you forgot something. And then also throw a couple snacks in the bag. Make sure you have your water packed. And then if you have picked up your, if you've done early bike check-in, you may have your timing chip. If you did grab that, please make sure to pack that. That's really, really important on race day. The next thing is practicing transitions. So you're going to have all that stuff packed the night before, but something you can start doing now, if you haven't already, is practicing the transitions. Transitions are something that most of the kids have not done before unless they've raced. So the swimming, biking, and running, most parts of that the kids have done. They're pretty comfortable with it. Transitioning is something that's very different for most of them. And it's a big area. So they're in there by themselves doing it with volunteers. So they have volunteers to help as much as they need. But our goal is for them to be as independent doing this as possible. Transition is a big kind of fenced in area. It's going to be where they're switching from one sport to the next. So not only are they switching from the swim to the bike, they come back in and they switch from the bike to the run. So in the transition area, their number is going to be on the bike rack. Their equipment goes there. It matches the number on their helmet, their bike, their body. They need to not only be able to set up their transition area, but utilize it. So whenever you go in on race morning, they're going to go in there. They're going to set up their equipment. They can't have a parent in there to help. If you look at the diagram here, it's very helpful to see the bikes are going to alternate direction on the rack. So you're going to go find your spot. You're going to set up your equipment, and you don't have a ton of room. As you can see here, you have about this much space by about this much space. Your bike is going to get set up. If you have a kickstand, you can use your kickstand. If not, then you're going to hang it by the saddle. And then all your equipment is going to go right next to it. So all of the things that you packed race night are going to get laid out there. The only thing that you're not going to leave there is the swim cap and goggles. Your athlete's going to keep those with them. One of the things that we like to do is make sure that they can set up their transition area on their own. So I recommend practicing having them lay out everything. I like to roll out the towel and set everything on top of it and leave just a little bit of space on the end so they can wipe their feet whenever they come in. So practice running in, dry their feet, and then get everything ready. But this gives you a good idea of kind of how much space you have whenever you're setting up transition. You also don't want to leave a whole lot of extra stuff in transition. So you just want to set up the stuff that they need. You don't want to leave a bunch of bags in there, straps, strings, anything like that. Causes a little bit of extra chaos. You also don't want them to have to figure out what they're supposed to grab and what they don't actually need. We do go over the setup a whole lot at our clinics so that we have the athletes practice the way that they set up. The biggest thing is making sure their stuff stays close to their front wheel of their bike. Most of the stuff that they're going to need is going to be their shoes, helmet, and their race belt. So ahead of time, if you can start practicing and seeing exactly what they're going to need and what they're not going to need so that they can determine on race day what they're going to want to have, that is highly ideal. So practice running up to their bike, putting on their shoes, putting on their helmet, grabbing their bike, and running out. Doing all of those things ahead of time is going to be really helpful. So that way, when they come in on race day, they know exactly how they want things set up, and they can do that. Now, again, you can go in and help on race day. You can help with the setup. You just can't help during the actual transition part. So once they're comfortable with the way things are set up, you are going to go in and you are going to make sure that you are aware of the swim whenever you're coming in from the swim to the transition area. Finding that path, being able to get all the stuff ready for the bike. So shoes, helmet, bike are really the key things. If you need to add a race number, so a t-shirt, shorts, or the race belt, you can do that then. Heading out to the bike out, and then also looking at the flag from where the bike in comes back to the transition spot. So usually those are going to be two different paths. So you just want to make sure that you're learning which path you're going to take. And then practicing coming back in. I advise most of our athletes to learn how to count racks. So once they've set up, they learn to count whenever they're running back in from the swim. They count, they know maybe they're the third rack down on the left. So they go down there, do their transition, go to the bike out. And then whenever they go back to go in from the bike in, they're also same thing. You're going to kind of have to count racks to figure out if there's like a landmark. And then you're going to go in, drop your bike, drop your shoes back, or drop your bike, drop your helmet back in your area. And then you are going to go to the run out. So practicing these things ahead of time are going to be super helpful so that your athlete can do the transition pieces, make sure they can get their helmet on, make sure they can get their shoes on. If they have a tricky kickstand, they've practiced that. If there are pieces that they're having a hard time with on race day, there are volunteers in there, usually like in bright neon shirts. So if they do need help, they just raise their hand, yell really loud, "I need help," so that they can see who to come to. If they can't get their bike off of the transition rack, anything like that, the volunteers are there to help. One of the things too that I would highly recommend practicing, you're going to want to practice your outfits. I know that kind of sounds like an interesting thing, but you want to practice whatever they're going to race in. So if they're going to race in a swimsuit the whole time, you want to make sure they can swim, bike, and run in that. Sometimes kids will think that they're going to be totally fine, and then they realize whenever they're running, it's just not comfortable to be in their swimsuit only. So they might want to wear a pair of shorts over it. Some kids don't need socks. They've practiced running without socks. It doesn't bother them at all. Some kids realize very quickly that if they try to run without socks, they feel everything in their shoe. It gives them blisters, or it's just not comfortable. So practicing these things ahead of race time, also things like making sure your goggles still work. If you haven't used your goggles since last summer, sometimes they're not keeping the water out like you're hoping. So practicing the outfits, making sure that works, making sure they decide whether they're running with or without socks, making sure they can get their socks on their feet. Also, obviously the swimming, bike, and running part, you need to practice those ahead of time. Kids don't need a whole lot of mileage, just practicing, making sure they're comfortable with everything. One of the other things is practicing walking and running with your bike. A lot of times athletes are really good at running their bikes or riding their bikes, but they haven't practiced walking or running with it because unless they're doing a lot of crosswalks, that's not something they do. Practice walking with it first. Also have them practice kind of jogging with it because they're going to see a lot of other kids starting to run out of transition with their bike. And they're probably going to try to do the same. We see a lot of bikes dropped in that case because they've never done that before. It's a little bit different situation trying to control your bike while you're running it. So practicing those ahead of time, that way they can be a little bit more comfortable on race day in case they decide to do that. Practicing mounting and dismounting their bikes, so getting on and off. There are volunteers all over the course. So you've got the volunteers that are in there helping with transition should they need it. You've got volunteers who are going to be at the mount and dismount line saying mount here, dismount here. I recommend giving your athlete the verbiage of understanding what mount and dismount means. So whenever they get to the mount line, they have to get past it before they can get on their bike. So sometimes they're saying mount here, get on your bike here, wait past the line first, different things like that. Same thing when they're coming back in and they're getting off their bike. Somebody's going to be telling them dismount here, get off your bike, and they need to be able to stop their bike safely and get off their bike with other kids around. Let's see, what else am I missing? I do, especially with the younger ones, really practice letting them know if they need help to ask for help. The volunteers on race day are amazing, and that's what they're there for, is to help. So if they can't get a helmet clasped, they can't get their shoe on, anything like that, they can't get their bike down, any of that stuff, they need to raise their hand, yell, "I need help." It's not being rude, it's not being inconvenient. That's what the volunteers are there for. So make sure they know that if they need help, that's what they do. Race morning, it's early. It's really early. Show up early. Don't think that if transition closes at a certain time that you're going to show up 5 minutes before. Show up early. Give yourself plenty of time. It makes it much less stressful. Parking is also way better whenever you show up early. That'll also give you time. If you did early bike check-in, it'll give you time to check your bike and make sure everything is still good. If you did not do that and you're showing up on race morning with your bike, do a once over once you take your bike out of your car or off your bike rack. Excuse me. Sometimes things happen in transition from the house to the race site. So double check the air in the tires, double check that the brakes are working, double check that the chain is actually on the gears. Sometimes the chain will drop and the kid doesn't know until they're in transition. So double check everything. Make sure the helmet is fitting in the morning. Sometimes race hair will be slightly different than whatever you have been practicing with. So make sure the helmet still fits. Then you're going to go line up to go into transition on race day. Lots of volunteers in there again. So you're going to go do your whole transition setup. Again, a parent can go in there to help. You are going to go through, they're going to do probably a little quick bike check on your bike just to make sure everything is in good working order. If you need help with something, usually there's people there to help a little bit, but it's not going to be a full bike maintenance clinic. Have your bike in good shape. You're going to go in, make sure that you either take your timing chip off the rack and make sure it goes on your athlete's left ankle. If you brought it from home because you had already done this the night before, make sure you put the timing chip on the left ankle. In transition, it is common courtesy to not mess with other people's equipment. So if you get there and somebody's in your space, then you just need to go tell a volunteer, hey, this is my spot. Somebody's in my space. Can you help me? There's protocols and ways that they will handle all of that, but let a volunteer handle somebody else's equipment. Make sure that your equipment is just in your space. You don't want your stuff out into the middle of the aisle because somebody's going to trip over it and it might be you. Make sure everything is kind of out of the way and it should be back by your bike, not out in the middle of the road or pathway. Make sure your bike's not tangled with somebody else's. Sometimes handlebars and wheels and things like that can get tangled. It's a little bit stressful. So just make sure everything is nice and tidy. And again, make sure you only put the things that you need. So again, try not to leave extra bags, backpacks, things like that. Give that to mom and dad. That way everything is kind of kept together, but you don't have to worry about straps and all of that. What else? Same thing I talked about before, make sure you walk the course. So once you have your stuff set up, you're walking the transition area. The really, really great thing about this race is it is very well marked. There are big flags that tell you where everything is. So there'll be a really big flag that says swim in. It lets you know you're coming into transition from the swim. So after you set up your area, go find the swim in flag. Go from the swim in flag to your bike, touch your bike. Then you're going to go find the bike out flag. So once you've touched your bike, you go find the bike out flag. I like to tell everybody, make sure you look and see where the mount and dismount lines are going to be. At this race, it's typically after you exit, there's like a little bit of a turn before you mount and dismount, but there's usually tape on the ground and then there's little signs. So make sure you know where that is. And then the bike in is going to be kind of like right there next to it. From bike in, you're going to go back to your bike and touch your bike seat or bike seat again. And then you're going to go to the big flag that says run out. So that's going to be all the pieces in transition so that you know where your bike is and your transition area is in relation to all of those flags. If you get a little disoriented during the race, there's lots of volunteers and a good flow of traffic. So pretty easy peasy there. After you've done all of that, if you need to get a little bit of a snack, make sure your athlete's sipping on water all morning. Sometimes in Texas, it's very hot. So just make sure you're sipping and staying hydrated. I do also recommend that our long course kids, because they're usually in the transition area a little bit longer, if they can have a bottle of water to sip on while they're waiting for their group to get called back, that's an excellent idea so that they don't get thirsty. The finish line is fantastic at this race. There's going to be a huge inflatable arch. There's also photographers everywhere. So make sure whenever you see a photographer that you are smiling, cheesing. If you know you want to do something whenever you cross the finish line, that way it's in your photos. Everybody, when they cross the finish line, gets a medal. So whether you were first or last, you were getting a medal for crossing the finish line because you finished. Also, the after party is super, super fun. So everybody's going to enjoy that. I do highly recommend parents looking at the maps ahead of time. The race course is very, very simple for the most part. But it is a live course, and especially when the older athletes are racing, they are incredibly fast on the bike. Do not cross where they are running or riding without double checking both ways. Some of those kids will be riding probably 20-something miles an hour at certain points. So please, please, please make sure that you are looking before you're crossing, especially that little area where they're coming out of transition for the bike. It gets a little bit crazy there. So don't be on the road. There's lots of great spectating from the sidewalk. You can see transition really well from any place around there. If you have multiple people going to watch, sometimes divide and conquer is best, because if you can see here on the map, the bike is going to be on one end leaving and the run is going to be on a different. So unless you want to get your steps in or you want to dart across, y'all might want to divide and conquer. There are parts where you can see both, especially if you have multiple kids, if you can kind of see different areas. The little corner down here where the red bike or run course and the green bike course overlap, there's a corner there that a lot of times parents like to stay on. So if they've got multiple kids, they can see one on the bike while one's on the run. But definitely look over the map so that you know what's going on. This race provides really good maps and information. So read as much of it as you can so you feel really comfortable on race day. And then if you have questions, ask volunteers, because they also have really, really good volunteers. I think that I got through everything. Yeah, I think that's about it.
Thank you, Coach Meagan. We definitely appreciate it. I think you've got these kids ready to go and ready to have an amazing day. We did initially have a Q&A scheduled for this webinar, but since we're having to do a re-record of this section, we're going to be hosting the multi-sport Q&A with Coach Meagan during the pre-race briefings. Pre-race briefings will be occurring during the early bike check-in time. Please check the event schedule for additional details on that. At Packet Pickup, we'll also have plenty of race crew available for you guys to answer any questions and get you guys ready to go. You know, the whole point of this is to have a fun day for everyone. So with that, I hope you have a great day. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you guys soon. Bye, Meagan.
Bye, thank you.